For what purpose does the gentleman from Georgia seek recognition?
Mr. Speaker, by direction of the Committee on Rules, I call up House Resolution 859 and ask for its immediate consideration.
The clerk will report the resolution.
House Calendar Number 142, House Resolution 859. Resolved that at any time after adoption of this resolution, the Speaker may, pursuant to Clause 2B of Rule 18, declare the House resolved into the Committee of the Whole House on the State of the Union for consideration of the bill, H.R. 5620, to amend Title 38 United States Code to provide for the removal or demotion of employees of the Department of Veterans Affairs based on performance or misconduct and for other purposes. The first reading of the bill shall be dispensed with. All points of order against consideration of the bill are waived. General debate shall be confined to the bill and shall not exceed 1 hour, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Veterans Affairs. After general debate, the bill shall be considered for amendment under the 5-minute rule. The bill shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the bill are waived. No amendment to the bill shall be in order except those printed in the report of the Committee on Rules accompanying this resolution. Each such amendment may be offered only in the order printed in the report, may be offered only by a member designated in the report, shall be considered as read, shall be debatable for the time specified in the report, equally divided and controlled by the proponent and an opponent, shall not be subject to amendment, and shall not be subject to a demand for division of the question in the House or in the Committee of the Whole. All points of order against such amendments are waived. At the conclusion of consideration of the bill for amendment, the committee shall rise and report the bill to the House with such amendments as may have been adopted. The previous question shall be considered as ordered on the bill and amendments thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one motion to recommit with or without instructions.
The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 1 hour.
Mr. Speaker, for the purposes of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Polis, pending on which time I yield myself such time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for purposes of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous materials on House Resolution 859 currently under consideration.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am pleased to bring forward on behalf of the Rules Committee today this rule that provides for consideration of H.R. 5620, the VA Accountability First and Appeals Modernization Act of 2016. The rule provides for 1 hour debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking member of the Veteran Affairs Committee, and also provides a motion to recommit. Additionally, the rule makes in order several amendments representing ideas from both sides of the aisle. Yesterday, the Rules Committee received testimony from the chairman and ranking member of the Veteran Affairs Committee and heard from numerous members on behalf of amendments offered. H.R. 5620 includes provisions of the House-passed versions of H.R. 1994, the VA Accountability Act, H.R. 280, the legislation related to bonuses paid to VA employees, and languages from H.R. 5083, the VA Appeals Modernization Act, and H.R. 4138, legislation related to the relocation payments for VA employees. The VA Accountability First and Appeals Modernization Act continues efforts by this Congress to reform the VA and address the bureaucratic mess that has plagued its operations for far too long. The bill builds on meaningful steps to restore accountability to the Department of Veterans Affairs and ensures it's appropriately providing veterans with the resources and care they deserve. We have heard time and time again that the Department of Veterans Affairs has failed to hold individuals accountable for their actions. In the circumstances when the VA has tried to take appropriate disciplinary action against an employee, the process is rarely efficient or meaningful. That's just simply unacceptable, Mr. Speaker. In fact, a recent study done by the GAO found that on average it takes 6 months to a year or even longer to remove a permanent civil servant in the federal government. This is ridiculous on its own. Imagine a private business having underperforming employees but not being able to remove them from their positions, and in some circumstances even being forced to give them raises or bonuses. Examples ranging from typical poor performing employee to the absurd. Projects continue to be mismanaged and cost overruns abound. And then there are the cases bordering on the absurd. In one case, the VA helped a veteran who was an inpatient of the substance abuse clinic to purchase illegal drugs. This employee continued to work at the VA for over a year before removal proceedings even started. Mr. Speaker, did you catch that? It was a year before the proceedings even started. This is amazing. Another VA employee, a nurse in this case, showed up to work intoxicated and participated in a veteran surgery while under the influence. Yet another VA employee participated in an armed robbery. This behavior would not slide in the private sector, and we certainly shouldn't stand for it when it comes to our nation's heroes who have put their lives on the line to serve our country. VA officials have even stated in testimony that the process for removing employees is too difficult and lengthy. This means that the problem employees continue to work for the VA and interact with veterans. These employees aren't providing services to the agency, and they aren't providing services to our nation's veterans. Employees like this need to be removed in a timely way, and at the very least, employees need to receive discipline appropriate to the misconduct in a way that discourages poor performance or behavior in the future, but that's just not happening right now. Let me be clear. I want to again emphasize this because it may even come up here in just a moment. This is not a broadside attack on all VA employees. This is not something that says that all VA employees are bad. In fact, far from it. My office, Mr. Speaker, yours as well, and many others, deal with the VA in a very constructive way, helping many of our veterans get what they need, and there are hardworking and wonderful individuals at the VA who are doing all they can to help our nation's veterans. In Northeast Georgia, my office has a good working relationship with our local VA, and especially in Augusta and Atlanta and the places we need. This is not an issue of all the employees. This, in fact, we have actually heard from employees of the VA that say we need these changes because they're tired of being dragged down by the anchors of the bad employees. But those employees who are doing work, they're just hindered by this bureaucracy, and it's got to stop. By a system that fails to remove or discipline those poorly performing counterparts. That's not fair to these hardworking individuals who are in fact doing their jobs. But most importantly, it's not fair to the veterans. But I'm going to take it a step further as well. It's not fair to the taxpayers. That's why this bill, the VA Accountability First and Appeals Modernization Act, will take steps to address this problem. The bill will provide improved protections for whistleblowers. It will restrict bonuses for supervisors who retaliate against whistleblowers and strengthen accountability of VA senior executive service employees. It would expand senior executive service removal authority and create an expedited removal system that would include an appeals process. It would also eliminate bonuses for VA senior executive service employees for 5 years and streamline authority for the Secretary of the VA to rescind employee bonuses. I wish these steps weren't necessary, but the ongoing problems plaguing the VA demand strong action. Our veterans deserve better, and we have taken steps we have taken these steps by this agency that are supposed to be providing them assistance. In addition to the problems with the VA employee misconduct, the VA current appeals process is unquestionably broken. As of June 1, 2016, there were almost 457,000 appeals pending in the VA, an increase of over 80,000 pending appeals from the preceding year. In fact, the Atlanta Regional Office, there are about 16,500 appeals pending with an approximate 3-year wait time, and the backlog is growing. Caseworkers in my Gainesville office have been told that cases from 2013 are in some cases just getting on the desk of VA employees. Appeals issues are the most common type of case that my district office sees. We have some great caseworkers in my Georgia office, but they're not able to speed up the process, only help navigate the red tape and the bureaucracy. My office is always willing to help veterans in need, and we stand by ready to help when they can. But it shouldn't take a congressional office to get answers from the VA. The VA should be answering the veterans in a timely manner. This process needs to be fixed. As a current, still active member of the United States Air Force Reserve, this is just not what we need to be in. Our offices should not. It is amazing, Mr. Speaker. Could you think about what we could do with our caseworkers if they were not bogged down in this kind of inefficiency they're dealing with the VA that we have addressed in this Congress on other occasions with funding and other issues, and they're still dealing with this. When a veteran appeals a claim, they shouldn't have to wait for years for an answer, but the current system has led to a backlog that leaves many veterans in limbo. This bill takes steps in the right direction. H.R. 5630 would streamline the appeals process and help clear the massive backlogs of appeals currently stuck and clogging the system. Under the bill, veterans will be able to obtain faster decisions and will be able to retain the original effective date of their claims throughout the appeals process. It will protect veterans' due process rights while updating the antiquated appeals process for VA disability benefits. This is a good bill, Mr. Speaker. It's something that we need to address. And we can make all the excuses in the world we want. We have funded this. As my senator from Georgia has stated, who is the chairman of the Senate Veteran Affairs Committee, money is no longer this biggest issue. They have the resources, they have the will of the Congress. The question is, will we give them the tools? And will the Secretary, more importantly, actually act upon those? That I have questions about, but we're here today to pass this rule and to get to this bill to help those who need help the most, and that is our veterans. And with that, I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I yield myself to time as I may consume.
The gentleman's recognized.
I thank the gentleman from Georgia, and I want to point out that with regard to procedures and regular order and how this body works, there's a difference between these two bills, the one that I discussed previously under the other rule and this one. The deficit bill, $30 billion in increase in the deficit that the Republicans want to do, that came through what we call regular order, meaning it was marked up in the Ways and Means Committee. That's normally how things work around here. A bill goes to committee, then it comes to the Rules Committee, then it goes to the floor. This bill, however, sort of magically appeared in Rules Committee. It didn't go through the Committee of Jurisdiction, which at very least would include the Veterans Affairs Committee. It might include other committees as well. It simply appeared and was referred to the floor. So what that means is members of Congress in a committee did not have a chance to amend it. We don't even know if it would have had a vote in committee, whether it cleared committee. Instead, it just sort of appeared right now. So, look, we all deeply care, of course, about veterans, and I agree with much of what my colleague from Georgia said about the need for the VA to do better. In Colorado, I've been very involved with our long overdue new Veterans Hospital in Aurora. We have been working many years on getting this completed. In fact, delays have cost taxpayers over $300 million, continue to leave many who served in our armed forces, including many of my constituents, without the convenient quality care that they were promised. So I joined my colleagues, Mr. Perlmutter, Mr. Kaufman, many others from our entire Colorado delegation, and of course wanting to improve the quality of services at the VA. We had an issue as well with fraudulent and over billing and time mislabeling of amount of time that patients waited out of our Fort Collins facility. But the problem with this bill is, of course, a number of them, but one of them that I want to briefly mention is it can actually lead to less accountability in the VA because it could lead to the punishment of whistleblowers, of employees who speak up against mismanagement. So when you're looking at passing a thoughtful human resources policy or personnel policy, and I don't dispute that perhaps we need to work with the VA to come up with a better way of doing it, you want to make sure that somebody who is a whistleblower is adequately protected. If somebody comes forward and says, you know what, we're doing mislabeling of timesheets, or you know what, I know why this project is $300 million over budget. It might be because of X, Y, or Z. It doesn't always rise to the federal level of whistleblower. We just want good employees to not feel that they can be fired for coming forward with the truth about the misconduct. And this bill does not do that. In fact, it'll make those who have useful information that can lead to systemic improvements at the VA more hesitant to come forward with that information. The bill removes a due process protection for VA employees, reduces the amount of time they have to respond to a termination by 2/3, from 30 days to 10 days. We all want to move expeditiously, but it seems like 30 days is a reasonable time frame. There's no evidence given as to why that 20-day reduction is needed. I haven't heard any. It also eliminates a requirement that supervisors provide specific examples of poor performance when employees terminated. Of course, there should be reasons given, opening the door for unnecessary firings, leaving VA employees with no recourse or rebuttal. In any organization, employee morale is critical, and to create an environment of paranoia in any enterprise, a company, an agency, is not conducive to furthering the mission. And creating this kind of uncertainty and chaos from a personnel perspective within the VA would likely only make our services to veterans even harder to provide, and worse, by decreasing employee morale and making it harder to attract the type of quality caregivers and administrators that we need to facilitate the VA program. Look, this bill is an attempt to make long overdue reforms. I wish that it was a thoughtful bipartisan attempt. I wish it had gone through committee. I wish that the committee had worked on it and marked it up and reported it out with bipartisan support. But that's not what's happened here. This bill appeared at the last minute, throws away basic rights of employees, would reduce morale, would endanger whistleblowers, and does very little to improve the quality of services of the VA or, frankly, the accountability of the employees of the VA, both at the management level and at the worker level. There's a, like a lot of ideas that we debate here, of course there's a kernel of an idea here. I mean, yes, we want to work together to reform the VA. We agree with that. My colleague from Georgia gave a lot of the reasons. I could give my own. I mentioned our price overrides on our hospital in Aurora. I've mentioned the manipulated timesheets in Fort Collins. I've mentioned, like my colleague from Georgia, just the individual cases where I've had constituents that we've had to help navigate an overly complex bureaucracy, and they shouldn't have to go to their member of Congress. For men and women who've served our country, for men and women who were injured in the line of duty, for men and women who were disabled from a service-related injury, we owe them our very best. They stood up and defended our freedom, and we owe them all the care and the highest quality of care to take care of them through our VA system or through Veterans Choice and the other types of programs that serve our veterans community. And of course, we need to reform and do better in the VA. So let's, again, rather than this kind of irresponsible, appeared out of nowhere magical bill that would actually penalize the very whistleblowers we need to tell us about misconduct, would decrease morale even further in an agency where it's already been impacted. Let's start fresh. Let's work together. Let's go back to committee. Let's come up with a thoughtful approach to improving the VA, and let's make this happen. I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman reserves. A gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This has to be the slowest magic trick I've ever seen in my life. This actually was as written, was introduced and also noticed for amendment 2 months ago. Sort of a delay in timing. That's a pretty good magic trick, I guess, if it lasts 2 months and you haven't had a chance to read it. Oh, well. I will.
In those 2 months, why wasn't there time for this to go through the committee process in regular order?
The vast bulk of this bill did. H.R. 1994 was passed out of this House. And we can continue, and I reclaim my time. This is just, again, frankly, this is a good bill that needs to move forward, and it's a protection of bad workers at the expense of the veterans. If you want to vote against this, then that's what you're saying. You're wanting to vote to protect bad workers instead of get the VA where it needs to go. 16 whistleblower groups have said this is the strongest whistleblower protection they've ever seen. So this idea that you're punishing whistleblowers is again, just a myth that needs to be. And I just have one thing, Mr. Speaker, before I yield to the gentleman from Oregon. 30 days to respond to showing up drunk for surgery. And one of the examples that I gave, you don't need 30 days to respond to that. You need to be fired immediately. So I'm not sure what the argument here. We both agree. I'll agree with my friend from Colorado. We need to fix this. I think we may have different ways to go about it. But again, at the expense of the good workers at the VA, we need to address this. With that, I yield to my friend from Oregon, Representative Walden, as much time as he may consume.
Gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
I thank my good friend and the gentleman for yielding and for his comments. And you are so spot on. Saturday morning in Medford, Oregon, I met with about 40 veterans who are furious about the delays in getting access to care, the fact that they can't maintain providers at the local facility. And by the way, that's not unique just there. I don't know about you, but I'm hearing all across my district, all across Oregon, that these clinics and the hospitals are having trouble recruiting people, keeping people. Morale's already bad. And part of it is because there's this lack of discipline. And I agree, Mr. Collins, that if you're a surgeon and you showed up drunk for the surgery, we're going to give you 30 days to dry out and explain yourself? Are you kidding me? If you were a pilot and showed up drunk from the flight, I can tell you what happens, right? You're done. And so this is part of the problem. The people I represent, the veterans, as you say, the men and women who've fought for our freedom as you've done, they want action, not delay. They want access to care in a timely manner, and everything in this bill, interestingly enough, came up in our discussion from them. How come you're paying bonuses to people that aren't doing their job? Why do they get bonuses at all? Isn't that what we pay them to do? This bill fixes that. Why is it when we raise complaints internally, there's retribution? This bill protects whistleblowers. Why isn't there more transparency about what happens inside the VA? This bill gets at that. Accountability, transparency will lead us to a better VA, and the dedicated men and women who work in those facilities will feel better about their organization if they know the people who are letting down the veterans that are around them are somehow held accountable. That's true in any organization. I was a small business owner for 21 years with my wife. This wasn't you show up drunk on the job and we'll talk about it in a month. That's not how this works. And nobody expects that kind of thing. So, look, we need to reform the VA. We need to take care of our men and women in uniform. We need to claw back the bonuses. We need to get this ship righted. We've helped 5,000 veterans out of my office over the last number of years. 5,000. Ask yourself this. Why do we all have to have staff in our district offices to help veterans work their way through the bureaucracy to get the help that they have earned and deserve? Yeah, we all do because we care and we want to help, but somewhere you have to back up and go, why do we all have to hire people to help these veterans get to that point? That shouldn't be necessary. They ought to be embraced by the agency. They ought to be cared for immediately. And it should be a complete last resort that they have to actually track down their member of Congress to say, can you help bust through the bureaucracy because my loved one doesn't get access to care or I can't get access to care? This is fundamentally a broken system that needs repair. I think we all agree on that. That's not a partisan issue. None of this should be. We should protect whistleblower rights. This bill does that. We should recoup the bonuses when they were given to undeserving employees, and we should increase transparency. But most of all, we should start with what matters most, and that is the veteran, and build everything out from there. That, ladies and gentlemen, should be our foremost commitment and our starting place. What's best for that veteran and that veteran's family? With that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. Gentleman from Georgia reserves. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to yield 3 minutes to the gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Larson.
Gentleman from Connecticut is recognized.
I thank the gentleman from Colorado, and I want to thank my colleague, the ranking member, Congressman Takano, for his work on this important issue as well. I was disappointed to see that my amendment was not made in order, and I'd like to take this opportunity really to expand on something the gentleman from Oregon, Mr. Walden, had to say. Congressman Takano and I had simply offered an amendment that would ensure we could improve the process for removing employees for misconduct or performance that warrants removal. It's reprehensible, and it ought to take action. This amendment that we introduced mirrored legislation introduced by our colleagues, Senator Johnny Isakson and Senator Richard Blumenthal. They have developed, by contrast, a bipartisan bill, the Veterans First Act, which will be a critical step to achieving true accountability that the VA so desperately needs to be an efficient agency for the men and women who serve this nation. It has more than 44 co-sponsors, including Senator Boozman, Senator Blunt, Senator Rounds, Senator Daines. All have supported language that we merely request to be in the bill to improve accountability at the VA that is sorely needed, while also protecting, and we've heard this a lot from our colleagues on the other side, due process. The due process of the whistleblower, the due process of people who are employed in the federal government. We have a bipartisan supported bill in the Senate that will take much needed steps for comprehensive due process and accountability within the VA. This is what the American people despise. Here we are in total agreement on what we need to do with veterans, but because of talking points in the House, we're at difference for politically messaging. We shouldn't make veterans the point of political messaging. We ought to make sure that the veterans get the kind of service that they need. And when we have a bill in the Senate that is bipartisanly approved and accepted and does just that, that's the kind of bill that we ought to embrace. I thank you and yield back my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentleman from Colorado reserves. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I do appreciate my friend from Connecticut. And the issue was there's two Takano amendments. One is actually made in order that does a similar thing, but also to simply say that the Senate bill, which was reported out in May, has never been taken up in the Senate because they've had significant opposition to it. In fact, the only way they got it reported out was union groups and others. They had to make changes to it to get their agreement. So I think at this point we're putting veterans first, not these outside interest groups. And I think we just need to understand that the Senate bill is not moved. The Senate bill, in fact, has not passed out of the Senate, and it shows no hope of passing out of the Senate at this point. And so why should we take that, frankly, product and come over here when we have a bill that can move? So with that, I think we're offering as many of these amendments as possible. We're going to be voting on my friend from California's amendment as well today. So these are the kind of things I think we just need to look at this bill as for what it is. It's helping veterans. And really the bottom line is not just simply saying this is what we're on. This is coming from VA employees. VA employees who say, help us not be, categorized with all the other things that are going on and with those that are actually bringing what we do down, and also trying to help the appeals process in this situation. So I appreciate the words of the members, Mr. Speaker, coming forward in this, but let's also be very honest with what is happening in both the bicameral legislature. We have one bill over that's not going anywhere that was reported out. We have an amendment that will be voted on today that reflects the gentleman from California's concern. We'll see how that will be decided by this body, but we're moving forward on a bill that will actually help, and we encourage everybody to be a part of that. With that, I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. Without objection, the gentlewoman from New York will control the remainder of the time of the minority. The gentlewoman is recognized.
Thank you very much. And Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to yield 5 minutes. The gentleman from California, the distinguished ranking member of the Committee on Veterans Affairs, Mr. Takano.
The gentleman from California is recognized.
I thank the gentlelady from New York for yielding me time. I rise in opposition to this rule and the underlying bill. All of us, Democrats and Republicans, believe in the need for stronger accountability for employees at the VA to ensure that our veterans get the care they deserve. Unfortunately, this legislation will fall short of that goal, and in doing so, set accountability efforts back for at least a year, if not more. Our Senate colleagues have a bipartisan bill that includes accountability provisions that could serve as a foundation for our legislation in the House. It doesn't mean it's perfect. It doesn't mean it in its current form it would be voted out of the Senate, but it is a far more bipartisan approach than the one that is before us today. We have an opportunity to advance language that both parties in both chambers can agree to and would contribute to a more accountable and more effective VA. H.R. 1994 and the current bill before us, I'm looking for the number, 5620, H.R. 5620, both contain flawed accountability tools. Tools which, if the VA used, would likely result in adverse judgments in the courts and cost a lot of time and money pursuing, with the likely result of those employees being reinstated. Democrats are ready to work with the majority to find the right path forward. That's why 75 Democratic or bipartisan amendments were submitted to the Rules Committee. Unfortunately, only 22 amendments were made in order to be considered by the full chamber. One of my amendments, not made in order, included a crucial fix to support and protect student veterans who have their education cut short by a school's abrupt closure. When a college or university like ITT Tech or Corinthian shutters its doors on short notice, student veterans enrolled at these institutions are routinely left with their GI Bill and yellow ribbon benefits severely weakened or even depleted, and with no degree or job prospects to show for it. There is urgency to put a fix in place, and my amendment would do that. There are no means in place for a student veteran enrolled at one of these institutions to get any part of their educational benefits restored. And many also lose their housing benefits, which student veterans depend on as a crucial source of housing support. The bipartisan amendment I submitted with Representative Susan Brooks would have restored post-9/11 GI Bill benefits and training time to veterans who are negatively affected by a school's sudden closure. And it would also allow the VA to continue paying student veterans a monthly housing stipend for a short time following a permanent school closure. There are even more important amendments that this House won't get to consider. Congresswoman Del Bene from Washington State offered an amendment to update the Advisory Committee on Minority Veterans, including LGBT representatives, and ensure that this committee better addresses the needs of all minorities. My colleague Congressman Waltz offered an amendment to extend the original deadline issued by the Agent Orange Act of 1991 to ensure that Vietnam veterans exposed to Agent Orange receive just compensation and care. Another colleague on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, Congresswoman Custer, offered an amendment to help improve access to care for veterans and strengthen the healthcare workforce by creating a pilot program to train physician assistants who agree to work at the VA in underserved communities. She also submitted an amendment to address the opioid crisis created by creating a pilot program that improves pain management to veterans suffering from opioid addiction and chronic pain. It also requires the VA to assess its ability to treat opioid dependency. And it also requires increased access to opioid overdose reversal medication at VA facilities. Access to care and reducing opioid addiction are some of the most pressing issues facing veterans today, yet neither of her amendments were made in order. Instead, the majority has once again introduced a partisan bill.
I'll yield gentleman an additional minute.
The gentleman is
A
recognized.
partisan bill that violates the due process rights of VA employees and includes several provisions that are likely to be overturned by our justice system, which is why the Department of Justice, Office of Personnel Management, and the VA itself have all raised serious objections. Even though 30% of VA employees are veterans themselves, the majority is treating their constitutional rights as inconvenient obstacles to evade instead of fundamental civil service protections to uphold. Finally, I believe that the majority's effort to institute new whistleblower provisions would be overturned for the same reason that the U.S. Attorney General's office said it would not defend an unconstitutional section of the Choice Act. It violates the Appointments Clause in the Constitution by allowing lower-level government employees to have the final say, decision-making authority to decide whether an employee will be fired. These are more than minor legal concerns. They are reasons why VA employees who commit misconduct will not be held accountable when their terminations are challenged in court. We can pass H.R. 5620, but we'll be right back here a year from now or 2 years from now when the law is deemed unconstitutional. I urge my colleagues to oppose the rule and the underlying bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman yields. The gentlewoman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, that was a gripe. I feel for the passion of my friend from California, but let's also get back to some issues of fact here. His amendment that was not made in order would not have helped the IT-Tech students. In fact, the VA itself has already said it wouldn't. So this discussion, by the way, it also cost $50 million. So it wouldn't help the very ones that were claiming it would help, but at the same point, the VA says it's not us. So as we look at this, again, are we wanting to help somebody or want to make, again, a political statement about a bill that you're trying to figure out a way to vote against? Maybe that's what we're doing here. Also, this issue of bipartisanship, 30 pieces of legislation have been passed on VA, of which 20 inside those 30 bills, 29 have had Democrat or bipartisan provisions added in them. This Congress. By the way, the Senate has passed none of those. If you want to know who's actually working to fix the problems in the VA, it's the House. This is, to keep bringing up and having a baseline and say we need the baseline of a Senate bill that can't move. I mean, that's like saying that I still want to play football for the Atlanta Falcons. It's not happening, a great, I guess, aspirational goal, but they haven't called me lately. So let's move something that actually works, that actually gives us this idea that it's going to be struck down in court. I'm an attorney. It's conjecture. You don't have a ruling that says that. You can say it all you want. I could go to the good judge from Texas here, Mr. Speaker. He hadn't made a ruling. Nobody's made a ruling, so it's conjecture. Sounds good in an argument if you're trying to find a reason to vote against it. This bill would harm veterans because veterans make up 35% of the VA's workforce. This one is the one that bothers me a little bit. As someone who still serves, when you go through training and you work, and many in this room and have served, you are trained in the military to the highest expectations of your service every day. And if you are forced to work with people who do not live up to those expectations, then the immediate punishment in the military is real severe and actual. This is ridiculous. We're lowering the standard for appeal when you've done something even grossly. And it's not just picking on, there's been also this argument, we're just picking on the low-level employees. No, it's not. It's for everyone, all the way up the chain. In my own home state, Mr. Speaker, we had a gentleman who was directly implicated in the scheduling issues in Augusta and asked for a transfer to Atlanta because he was not liking the working conditions in Augusta. He should have never got a transfer to Decatur. He should have been fired and prosecuted. Now, if we want to keep coming up with reasons to vote against this bill, fine and dandy. Keep it up. But when we look at the honesty here of the questions and we look at how we're discussing this, let's just see some of the amendments that were made in order. Let's go back also to amendments. 16 Democrat amendments made in order, 5 Republican, 1 bipartisan. Many of the applications either had dual meaning, they were doing basically the same thing, so we made some in order. And then some of the amendments that were not made in order would not have done what they said they were going to do anyway. So we're about a rule, about a bill. If you want to vote against it, if you would rather put the appeals process of bad employees ahead of VA actual services and veterans who need it, then vote against it. But you just framed it. Go spend that one to your local veteran service organization who support these kind of measures. Go spend that one to them. It's not going to work. They ain't buying it. I've been there for a while. I reserve.
The gentleman reserves. The gentlewoman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have any more requests for time. May I inquire of my colleague if he has more speakers? If not, I'm ready to close.
I do not, and it is good to see the gentlelady.
Nice to see you as well.
No, we have no other speakers, and if you would like to close, we'll go right ahead.
Thank you very much. I shall do that. Mr. Speaker, the bill is not a serious proposal to reform the Department of Veterans Affairs, although we certainly know that that needs to be done. I think a major bill should be in order to get that done. The Veterans Administration is vastly overstretched, and we are concerned for the safety of the veterans and their healing. My personal hope is that we can get them out of the building business and just the business of taking care of veterans' health and concerns. And we should also be voting on a bill that includes the funding that we need to address the Zika virus. The head of the Centers for Disease Control, Tom Frieden, recently warned that, quote, the cupboard is bare. Basically, we are out of money and we need Congress to act, end quote. Mr. Speaker, if we defeat the previous question, I will offer an amendment to the rule to bring up legislation that would fully fund the administration's request to address this public health crisis. This request was made more than 7 months ago to help combat the spread of the virus, when I think we could have done better to control it and to accelerate research into finding a vaccine. We have instead just been left behind and trying to get caught up on some of that. Over that time, the virus has spread at an alarming rate as the range of mosquito transmission far exceeds the initial estimates, and it is beyond time for us to finally act. And just today I read that they have discovered that the Zika virus can cause brain damage to adults, not just to fetuses. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to insert the text of the amendment in the record, along with extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
Thank you, and I urge my colleagues to vote no on ordering the previous question, the rule, the underlying bill, and I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentlelady yields. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I guess, as they always try to say, Mr. Speaker, you start off with something positive. So I'll start with positive. I agree with the gentlelady from New York. They need to get out of the building business. They proved totally incompetent, so let's just get them out of it. I agree completely. But then let's get back to the bill. Let's get back to what we've talked about. What is amazing to me in this whole rules debate, and I'm sure will happen in the general debate on this bill, is there's going to be a lot of reasons given to vote no. And to say this due process or this employee or that. But the bottom line is when you look at the evidence, and I understand we all have constituencies that have different opinions, but at the Veterans Affairs Department, there is only one constituency that matters, and that's the veteran who is served, who is to be served, and to have their dedication honored. To actually come before this body and advocate for a bill that can't pass the Senate after it's been watered down, that can't move forward, to advocate to say that we're making, every excuse in the world. You're going to make them at-will employees at the VA. I've heard this last night. No, you're not. There's still the same hiring program, still hiring priorities. It's just that if you do something wrong, there's going to be a process to actually remove you. And frankly, Mr. Speaker, if the Secretary at the VA can't do the things he should do, then maybe he should be removed. Because at this point in time, this House and this Senate and this Congress and even this administration have acted. We've provided funds, we've provided resources, and we've provided direction. But you cannot continue to keep building on a faulty foundation. And if you can't get rid of the bad actors in this, if you can't have an appeals process in which somebody can get an answer in shorter time than 3 years, there's a problem. If you think that's okay, here's the framing of it, Mr. Speaker. If you believe that is okay, then vote no on the previous question. Vote no on the rule and vote no on the bill. If you think the Senate could pass something, wait for them. But as they say, for such a time as this, you have a moment. It's a moment of choosing. It's a time just to decide. Are we going to continue to make excuses? Are we going to put the veterans first? And those veterans who actually work within the VA system, who are tired of watching others abuse it. To actually say, again, Mr. Speaker, that you're going to harm the veterans who work for the VA by disciplining bad employees is an affront to every veteran who works at the VA and every active duty service member and every reservist and guardsman who have lived to the highest standards of honor and integrity and doing their job. They're bad actors everywhere, even in the military. And when found, they're handled efficiently and quickly. That exists everywhere else except here. So if you want to continue the status quo, then make speeches. If you want to move something forward and work toward a solution, then you vote yes on the previous question, you vote yes on the rule, and you vote yes on the bill. And then you can go home to your veteran service organizations and your people who are actually trying to get help and say, I tried to move something, I'm actually working for you. Or you can go back to them and say, I'm protecting the employees and the unions and the appeals process and due process, while all at the point in time our veterans are dying because they can't get services. Easy choice, Mr. Speaker. Easy choice. And with that, I just challenge my colleagues to continue to work on this issue. We can disagree, but that disagreement should never stop us from helping the veterans who need help to lower their appeals times, to get the efficient organization that they deserve and this country deserves, not just our veterans, our taxpayers, the citizens who look up to this government. They deserve a functioning, operating system that meets the needs that they were supposed to do to the highest integrity that they have been given charge to. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time and move the previous question on the resolution.
The gentleman yields. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed, no. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, on that I request the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those in favoring a vote of yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Members will record their votes by electronic device. Pursuant to Clause 8 and Clause 9 of Rule 20, this is a 15-minute vote on ordering the previous question. Will be followed by 5-minute votes on adopting the House Resolution 859, if ordered, or ordering the previous question on House Resolution 858, and adopting House Resolution 858, if ordered. This is a 15-minute vote.
The first vote series of the day in the House, members have been considering the rules for debate on 2 bills, a measure that would halt health-related tax increases on the middle class and senior citizens, and another aimed at boosting employee accountability in the Department of Veterans Affairs. So the series begins with a vote on a procedural motion on the Veterans Affairs bill, and then we will vote on a procedural motion on the previous bill, the one that would halt health-related tax increases on the middle class. Members are also expected to consider a resolution calling for the impeachment of IRS head John Koskinen. The bill's sponsor, Congressman John Fleming, came to the floor at the beginning of today's session to give notice of his intent to bring the legislation to the floor.
Pursuant to Clause 2A1 of Rule 9, I rise to give notice of my intent to raise a question of the privileges of the House. The form of the resolution is as follows. House Resolution 828, impeaching John Andrew Koskinen, Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, for high crimes and misdemeanors. Resolved that John Andrew Koskinen, Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, is impeached for high crimes and misdemeanors, and that the following articles of impeachment be exhibited to the Senate. Articles of impeachment exhibited by the House of Representatives of the United States of America in the name of itself and of the people of the United States of America against John Andrew Koskinen, Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, in maintenance and support of its impeachment against him for high crimes and misdemeanors. Article 1. John Andrew Koskinen, in his conduct while Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, engaged in a pattern of conduct that is incompatible with his duties as an officer of the United States as follows. Commissioner Koskinen failed in his duty to respond to lawfully issued congressional subpoenas. On August 2, 2013, the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform of the House of Representatives issued a subpoena to Secretary of the Treasury Jacob Lew, the Internal Revenue Service documents. That subpoena demanded, among other things, that all communications sent or received by Lois Lerner from January 1, 2009 to August 2, 2013, on February 14, 2014, following the Senate's confirmation of John Andrew Koskinen as Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform of the House of Representatives reissued the subpoena to him. On March 4, 2014, Internal Revenue Service employees in Martinsburg, West Virginia, magnetically erased 422 backup tapes, destroying as many as 24,000 of Lois Lerner's emails responsive to the subpoena. This action impeded congressional investigations into the Internal Revenue Service, targeting of Americans based on their political affiliation. The American people may never know the true culpability or extent of the Internal Revenue Service targeting because of the destruction of evidence that took place. Wherefore, John Andrew Koskinen, by such conduct warrants impeachment and trial and removal from office. Article 2, John Andrew Koskinen engaged in a pattern of deception that demonstrates his unfitness to serve as Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service. Commissioner Koskinen made a series of false and misleading statements to Congress in contravention of his oath to tell the truth. Those false statements included the following. Number one, on June 20th, 2014, Commissioner Koskinen testified that since the start of this investigation, every email has been preserved. Nothing has been lost. Nothing has been destroyed, end quote. Number two, on June 23rd, 2014, Commissioner Koskinen testified that the Internal Revenue Service had, quote, confirmed that backup tapes from 2014 no longer existed because they have been recycled pursuant to the Internal Revenue Service normal policy, end quote. He went on to explain that, end quote, confirmed means that somebody went back and looked and made sure that in fact any backup tapes that existed had been recycled, end quote. Number three, on March 26, 2014, Commissioner Koskinen was asked during a hearing before the Committee on Oversight and Government Reform of the House of Representatives, quote, sir, are you or are you not going to provide this committee all of Lois Lerner's emails, end quote. He answered, quote, yes, we will do that, end quote. Each of those statements was materially false. On March 4th, 2014, Internal Revenue Service employees magnetically erased 422 backup tapes containing as many as 24,000 of Lois Lerner's emails. On February 2nd, 2014, senior Internal Revenue Service officials discovered that Lois Lerner's computer hard drive had crashed, rendering hundreds or thousands of her emails unrecoverable. Commissioner Koskinen's false statements impeded and confused congressional investigations into the Internal Revenue Service targeting of Americans based on their political affiliation. Wherefore, John Andrew Koskinen, by such conduct, warrants impeachment and trial and removal from office. Article 3. John Andrew Koskinen, throughout his tenure as Commissioner of the Internal Revenue Service, has acted in a manner inconsistent with the trust and confidence placed in him as an officer of the United States as follows. During his confirmation hearing before the Senate Committee on Finance, John Andrew Koskinen promised, quote, we will be transparent about any problems we run into, and the public and certainly this committee will know about those problems as soon as we do, end quote. Commissioner Koskinen repeatedly violated that promise. As early as February 2014 and no later than April 2014, he was aware that a substantial portion of Lois Lerner's emails could not be produced to Congress. However, in a March 19, 2014 letter to Senator Wyden of the Senate Committee on Finance, Commissioner Koskinen said, quote, we are transmitting today additional information that we believe completes our production to your committee and the House Ways and Means Committee. In light of these productions, I hope that the investigations can be concluded in the very near future, end quote. At the time he sent that letter, he knew that the document production was not complete. Commissioner Koskinen did not notify Congress of any problem until June 13, 2014, when he included the information on the 5th page of the 3rd enclosure of a letter to the Senate Committee on Finance. Wherefore, John Andrew Koskinen, by such conduct, warrants impeachment and trial and removal from office. Article 4. John Andrew Koskinen has failed to act with competence and forthrightness in overseeing the investigation into Internal Revenue Service targeting of Americans because of their political affiliations as follows. Commissioner Koskinen stated in a hearing on June 20th, 2014, that the Internal Revenue Service had, quote, gone to great lengths, end quote, to retrieve all of Lois Lerner's emails. Commissioner Koskinen's actions contradicted the assurances he gave to Congress. The Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration found over 1,000 of Lois Lerner's emails that the Internal Revenue Service had failed to produce. Those discoveries took only 15 days of investigation to uncover. The Treasury Inspector General for Tax Administration searched a number of available sources, including disaster backup tapes, Lois Lerner's BlackBerry, the email server, backup tapes for the email server, and Lois Lerner's temporary replacement laptop. The Internal Revenue Service failed to examine any of those sources in its own investigation. Wherefore, John Andrew Koskinen, by such conduct, warrants impeachment, trial, and removal from office.
Under Rule 9, a resolution offered from the floor by a member other than the majority leader or the minority leader as a question of the privileges of the House has immediate precedence only at a time designated by the chair within 2 legislative days after the resolution is properly noticed. Pending that designation, the form of the resolution noticed by the gentleman from Louisiana will appear in the record at this point. The chair will not at this point determine whether the resolution constitutes a question of privilege. That determination will be made at the time designated for consideration of the resolution.
And Congressman Fleming was on the House floor earlier today. So under the rules of the House, Chamber now has 2 days to decide whether or not they want to take up or consider this impeachment resolution of IRS Commissioner John Koskinen. The House now voting on a procedural motion related to a bill seeking further accountability in the Department of Veterans Affairs. Should this be approved, we expect a vote on the rule for debating this measure to follow, and then 2 more votes expected to vote on the previous question or procedural motion for the measure that would halt health-related tax increases on the middle class and senior citizens. The White House issued a veto threat on this earlier today, and a possible vote on the rule for considering that measure. Journalist Sarah Ferris has tweeted out an update on congressional consideration of Zika funding. She says, Zika update, Florida Governor Rick Scott will be meeting with House Speaker Paul Ryan today at 4:40 to talk about funding for research to stop the Zika virus. Republican presidential nominee Mike Pence is making the rounds on Capitol Hill. He's meeting with congressional leaders, and he had these remarks after the meeting.
Well, I hope you like the new setup. First of all, we just left our conference, and there was an excitement in the air, for one, to have our good friend, Governor Mike Pence, back with us. For many years, he led us in our conference, led us into the majority, and a lot of excitement as he travels across the country with a number of members joining him in the future of making America great again. Now, on the floor this week, we have 4 different bills. We will deal with tax increases to Obamacare, changing the Veterans Administration, transparency in government, and security. Those are issues that Mike has been talking about across this country, but they're issues that America has been telling him about. So first of all, we will deal with, as you know, in Obamacare, the premiums continue to rise, and now the taxes. Martha McSally has a bill to protect the seniors and the middle class from their tax increase going up with Obamacare. Secondly, we watched the failure in the VA system, the backlog in disability claims. But it becomes so bad that you can't even fire an employee when they show up drunk. Our chairman, Jeff Miller, has a bill to deal with that. And as all Americans believe, you should have transparency when it comes to Washington and bureaucracy. We'll be moving a bill to dealing just with that. And last, Jackie Jaworski. The challenge of where we find security around the world, this is not the time to be releasing those terrorists in Gitmo and bringing them to America. We'll have a bill that prohibits that as well. So just as our governor, Mike Pence, travels this country talking about the future, and the House will be leading a better way agenda and look forward to, after this election, to have a team in the White House that will sign the bills to protect us for the tax increases, give us greater transparency, reform the VA system, and give us all the security we need. Well, it was great having our friend Mike Pence come and join us at the Republican conference today. Governor, we appreciate you being there. You could tell the enthusiasm in the room with our members, many of whom Mike served with, but it was the same kind of enthusiasm I've seen as I've gone around the country traveling, campaigning for House Republicans. You can sense in those states, whether it's a swing state or not, that there is incredible momentum behind the Trump-Pence ticket, and it's growing. I know I personally thanked Mike for what they did when Donald Trump and Mike Pence came down to South Louisiana just a few weeks ago. And while people were at their lowest point, gutting their houses during and after this tragic flood that we experienced, you could see not only how much they lifted people up at an incredibly low time, how much it really gave people spirit to know that there was somebody who really cared. The fact that they showed up, went to churches, and gave out relief supplies to people. That's the kind of people that they are. When you look at the momentum behind the Trump-Pence ticket, it shows you that people are really responding to their message of making America great again. And as we talk about our message of a better way, the agenda that we've pushed as House Republicans to show how you can get the country back on track, how you can create jobs, how you can rebuild this middle class, and how you can strengthen a military that's been depleted. It goes hand in hand with the message that Donald Trump and Mike Pence have been delivering all around the country. It's why you've got such great enthusiasm. It's why we're going to win this election and be able to finally start turning this country around again. So, again, it was great seeing Mike before our conference. The members are excited, but more importantly, you're seeing people all around the country excited about the optimism that their ticket, the Trump-Pence ticket, is giving to making America great again.
Thanks. Well, it was a highlight of this year, actually, to have Mike Pence here today addressing our conference, and we are very proud to have him on the ticket, proud of the leadership that he is bringing. And as you think about this election, it's been anything but status quo. Clearly, this country is hungry for new, fresh, dynamic leadership. And what we see being offered by the other side is a defense of the status quo. It's a defense of the top-down, government knows best approach. And what we've been offering as Republicans from the beginning of this year has been that bottom-up, empowering people, making sure that their people's voice is restored in this government, that we have a government that reflects the consent of the governed. Because at the end of the day, we need to be about the farmer, the builder, the stay-at-home parent, or the veteran. It should not be one in which a government continues to think that it knows best. And that is the choice that faces the country this fall. We are excited about the leadership of Donald Trump and Mike Pence that they're bringing to this country to help make America great again.
Well, it's good to see everybody. We had our last political conference today, and we were joined by someone who needs no introduction. For Hoosiers, Mike Pence is their governor. For Americans, Mike Pence is Donald Trump's running mate, next vice president. For us, Mike Pence is a friend. Mike Pence is a former colleague. 7 out of 10 Americans believe that this country is heading in the wrong direction. He is working with all of us to make sure that we put this country back on the right track. We are offering an agenda to this country to show how we can get this country back on top, to show this country how we can get jobs, show how this country how we can fight poverty, rebuild our military, restore self